All right, welcome back to the channel, everybody. MrAyrit here. We do mainly audio related things on this channel, and today's topic is going to be Delta Sigma DACs. I've got 3 different price categories of these DACs, and we're going to go into, just kind of like what you get with each one, what kind of hookups, what kind of inputs, outputs, and of course we're going to get to sound and build quality and all that stuff. But really the question is do DACs matter? My answer that I've arrived at with my experience is yes, absolutely they matter. And then there's kind of the camp of like, well, do all Delta Sigma DACs sound the same versus, having an R2R DAC or something along those lines, right? So we're going to talk specifically about Delta Sigma DACs today. Those DACs, I'm not going to pick each of them up because I got them all here on my table, and it's, there's a lot going on here, but basically we've got the S.M.S.L SU6. That's like a $130, $40 DAC. We've got the Soncoz SDG1, which is like a $500 DAC. And then we've got the SMSL VMV D1se DAC, which is up there in price. Maybe it's like a $700-800 DAC. All of them chip-based DACs, not multi-bit, not R2R. So what's the difference between them? How big of a difference is there? Which one is the sweet spot or gives you the best bang for your buck? Those are all kind of things that we want to talk about and things that I've been thinking about and experimenting with here as I've tested out these DACs. Now, to facilitate testing out these DACs before we start looking at the actual DACs themselves, I use this little guy. This is just the One Little Bear by Duoc Audio. This is just a 3-way XLR switch. So you can see on the back, you've got several different sets of XLR ins and then one XLR out. Now, the SU6 is not a balanced DAC. That's probably one of the big differences between it and these other 2 offerings. So I would just had it hooked up to single-ended, whereas I used the switch box to test between these other 2 and between a couple other R2R DACs when I was playing around with it, right? But so something like this, and I'll link this down below, and I'll link an RCA version of a switch box too. But these things, if you get into doing these A/B tests and you want to be able to switch super fast between DACs or amps or things like that, these can be really, really great devices to have on hand. So I know I couldn't have done this test without this guy, so I just thought I would mention that here to start with. Okay, so let's look at first the SMSL SU6. It's just this little guy, right? So it's a pretty compact one. I've got the Soncoz right underneath it here, and you can see it's much larger. And then there's the SMSL VMV1 over here. You can see by far the Soncoz is the largest and the SMSL is the smallest. The SMSL it's a nice tight little footprint. It's about the size of like the smaller footprint Schiit products if you want a size reference. You've got a screen up here, LED screen. Basically it's going to tell you what your input is, and then it's going to give you your volume reading in decibels on there. Very clear, very easy to understand. No issues with the display there at all. On the back, you've got RCA out, you've got coax out in, you've got optical in, and you got USB-C in, which is kind of cool. You can see it's got a Bluetooth antenna here, and we'll talk more about Bluetooth here in a little bit, but all of these DACs have Bluetooth built into them. And then you can see it's got the power switch on the back here, and it uses, instead of using the big PC power cable like the other 2, it uses a smaller cable, which is just one of these little 2-pin guys. Okay, so the other 2 DACs, they use the larger, kind of more typical PC style cable here. So the SMSL and the rest of these DACs, they all come with remotes. Here's the SMSL remote. It's nothing too fancy, but it gets the job done. I didn't have any issues using the remote. It uses typical just AA batteries, which I like. Which is not the case for all of these DACs. Okay, so the SMSL, it uses, they all use Sabre chips. They all use ESS chips. The SMSL SU6 uses just reading this off my screen so I get it right, ES9038Q2M chip. Okay, latest Qualcomm Bluetooth chip, it says. So you get aptX HD, you get SBC, you get AAC, you get LDAC on this up to 2496. As far as built-in decoding goes, it's got PCM up to 32-bit 678 kilohertz. You got DSD up to 512, DOP 256. Okay, so it doesn't have MQA, but it's got just about everything else, it looks like. So that is the SU6. Let's look at the Soncoz here. So the Soncoz is a big DAC, and you can see it's got a volume knob on the front. That's a little bit different from the s.m.s.l. It does have a rather large display here, but the display is a little weird, and instead of actually displaying like any sort of text or numbers or anything like that, it just uses like little symbols on the front, and then around the volume wheel it kind of like fills in around there, and I'll show you some b-roll of that here. But so I didn't really like this display of the Soncoz because you kind of have to know what you're looking at, and I just wish it had text to tell you what was going on, and I wish it had a number for the volume so you just could see it at a glance. You can see some venting. You know, it's a good looking thing. The build of the s.m.s.l, I didn't talk about this. It feels pretty well built. The Soncoz probably feels the worst built out of all these, to be honest with you. If we look at the back of the Soncoz here, we got outputs, XLR output, RCA output. We've got AES in, we've got coax in, coax out, USB in, USB-C in, Toslink in. You got a little switch for 110 to 220, and then you can see the PC power port there, along with the power switch on the back. One thing that's interesting is this does have Bluetooth, but there is no external antenna, so it's built in, which I kind of like. You know, I was kind of actually shocked when my phone saw the Soncoz Bluetooth. I didn't even realize it had it because it didn't have an antenna. Remote of the Soncoz. Pretty generic remote here. Again, it worked just fine. I don't have any real complaints about the remote. It's just nothing fancy. Again, just typical AA batteries on that guy. Now for specs on the Soncoz. So, I mean, really, when you're looking at specs, the Soncoz has very similar specs to the SMSL SU6, except obviously it's got balance. It's got the same DAC chip in it, except there's two of them. It's got similar Bluetooth capabilities, LDAC, aptX, all that. As far as decoding capabilities, very, very similar. The one thing that the Soncoz touts is that it does have like maybe a better power supply, or you know, they talk about the power supply being well built. I'm not, you know, probably the person to speak to that, but just it's in their documentation as far as that goes. So just for balance purposes, just know that the balance outputs have 4 volts coming out of them, whereas the single-ended has 2 volts. I'm not sure. I couldn't find that information for the s.m.s.l SU6. Okay, so lastly, let's take a look at the s.m.s.l VMV D1se. What a mouthful that is. This is, so VMV, my understanding is that this is s.m.s.l's kind of like higher tier line of devices. This is my first VMV device that I've tried. The build on it seems very solid. It's very well thought out. It's got a nice color display here that tells you everything you need to know. You know, you've got a multi-function button here that you can twist and change volume. You got a couple of buttons here. You've got around on the back, you've got XLR out, RCA out, I2S, coax in, optical in, USB-C in. You can see their Bluetooth antenna, and then again you've got kind of the PC power cable with the on-off switch there. As far as the remote, this is kind of a nicer feeling remote. It's aluminum, it feels really solid with the hand, functions just fine. The only problem or thing I don't really like about this remote is it uses like a CR2032, I think, like a watch battery style thing, which I happen to have a pack of them lying around, but just it's not as typical. So I thought that was just kind of frustrating that I had to go dig around in my junk drawer to find one as opposed to just using AA's. But it is a nice little compact remote and definitely stands out compared to the other two remotes that we've got here. And just in general, the build quality of this guy, it's very dense feeling. It's probably the nicest built of all of them, as you would expect for a product that's supposed to be a little more premium. One interesting note here is like the foot on these, instead of just being a little rubber tip, they're like these metal little points. They look kind of cool, I guess, but I don't know that they're as functional as just regular typical rubber feet. Okay, so spec wise, let's talk about the D1se here. Now, I should note before I talk about the specs here that while I purchased the SU6 and the Soncoz myself, this VMV was sent to me by Apos Audio. So thank you to them for sending that out. They didn't try to influence this review in any way, but they were kind enough to lend me the device for testing. Okay, so the difference in chips here is that the VMV D1se uses the ES9038 Pro chip instead of the lower end chip that's in the other two DACs here. It also talks about it having a special power supply for the VMV. As far as decoding and Bluetooth and all that, it seems very similar to the other two as far as same bit rates, same Bluetooth quality, all of that. Although this chipset actually can do MQA decoding. Now, as far as actual like filters and things that these DACs can do, the SU6 is probably the most bare bones in that regard. The Soncoz has a little more features as far as it's got a few different filters that you can play around with, and the VMV D1se has tons of filters that you can play around with. So it's got filters, and it's also got like sound color modes where you can change the richness and all this stuff. As usual with these filters and things like that, I don't think they make a huge impact on the sound, the overall sound from my testing. So I usually just kind of leave them on like the standard thing, just out of the box, whatever it comes with. But there is something there to play around with, and if you like playing around with that stuff, certainly the VMV has tons and tons of features as far as that goes. But that's all kind of like, for me, that's frills that I don't really care about. What I care about, and what you probably care most about, is about the sound, and this is what's really interesting to me. So getting to the sound here, the SU6 I thought did not sound very good at all. It is a very, very harsh sounding DAC. And how I tested this, honestly, first was I had the Soncoz, and I've been using the Soncoz with my stereo system that's hooked up to my TV for movies and gaming and stuff like that. And I didn't have any complaints about it, really, right? Like, I did extensive testing between the Soncoz and the D1se, and I thought largely the sound was very, very similar between the two. Like, I don't think between the D1se and the Soncoz, I don't think I could pick them out in a blind test. I think that would be very difficult to do. But switching to the SU6 after listening to the Soncoz, I immediately noted like a harshness to it, and it's much sharper, and just it grated on me, honestly. And so if you're thinking about like, well, when it comes to DACs, does the chip matter? Well, I'm sure it does matter, but the implementation matters more, and you've probably heard that somewhere, because if the chip was all that mattered, the Soncoz and the SU6 use the exact same chip. So there's clearly a difference between the two DACs, and so implementation must play a significant role in this. Now, the D1se has a higher end chip. It gives it MQA decoding ability, but as far as actual sound quality goes, again, I did not really notice much of a difference from the Soncoz to the D1se. I still prefer R2R DACs in general, and right now I've sold my Soncoz 2541, which I compared to these as well, and thought was a little bit better in sound quality, than these. But really what I'm using for my main DAC right now is the Cayin RU6, just my little dongle, and I have two of those, and I prefer the sound of that over both of these, well, all of these, I guess, Delta Sigma DACs. But I am keeping the Soncoz because it has a remote, and I want to use it with my home theater setup. So the only reason I picked up the SU6 in the first place was because I thought I could get away with maybe a cheaper DAC in my home theater setup and still have a remote. Now, function-wise, that was fine, but when it came to sound quality, the SU6 just was not going to cut it. It really, there is quite a significant difference in quality going up to the Soncoz from the SU6. And so where does this put us with DACs and all these things? Well, for me, I've tested quite a few DACs up to this point, right? I do think my preference leans towards the R2R stuff, but I didn't have an R2R DAC that had remote functionality that I could use. Otherwise, if I could use a remote with the Cayin RU6, that would be in my home theater setup right now, but that's not possible. So I'm settling on the Soncoz SDG1 because it has a remote and it has all that functionality, which makes it convenient to have it hooked up to my home theater system. And I think that while these Delta Sigma DACs are catching up with some of the R2R stuff, I think these latest iterations, the Soncoz, the D1se from VMV1, the s.m.s.l stuff here, and the Toping D1, is it D? No, it's D90, the D90se, which I did a review for not too long ago. I thought that was pretty well done DAC. So what that tells us, though, is that the Soncoz SDG1 is a great value, because if it sounds as good as those other two DACs and they cost almost twice as much, that just tells you what a good bargain you're going to get with the SDG1 if you want the functionality that this DAC provides. And I bought mine on the used market for $350, I think. So when you compare that to, new prices of the VMV D1se or the D90se, like I said, they're $700, $800, $900 for those DACs. So I think the Soncoz is a pretty good deal personally, and that is the Delta Sigma DAC that I am going to keep. Outside of that, I'm going to use Cayin RU6s for me at my desktop setups. Whew. So that is my DAC testing. Hopefully that is the last DAC I have to test for a while. I'm kind of tired of testing DACs, to be perfectly honest with you. And I'm hoping I can just move on to some other things. So Soncoz is a great value. The D1se is still a fine DAC, and it has a lot more features that you can fiddle with. For me, just pure sound quality, bang for buck, it's the Soncoz. I would avoid the SU6. I would not buy that. I would look for, if you want a cheaper DAC that has remote function, I would maybe try like a Topping E30 or something like that, and see how it compares. It's been a long time since I've heard that DAC, but either that or like the SU8, the old SU8, I think is going to put you in a better spot than this SU6. And that's too bad, because I thought it was going to be a great bargain, but it's just not there for sound quality as far as that goes. So questions, comments, alternative opinions, thoughts down below. As usual, I thank you for your time. I appreciate you being here, and I hope to see you in the next one.